And we are live.
Okay.
And if you're a fan of the Benefit of a Doubt podcast, well, that kind of makes sense because, here you are. But you also know that I take the news every week and offer some insight, but I also try to make it a little fun, a little funny. And that's partially because that's who I am, but not entirely because you see this show is modeled after another show that I used to do called The Digit Daily. And that show was inspired by a Digit video series hosted and produced by my guest today. So, in a way, if you like what you hear, you can blame I definitely meant thank my guest, Alli Goldberg. Alli is a comedian and performer whose work is most widely known in the stand-up circuit and also on the show Two Girls, One Podcast. She's one half of that dynamic duo, and she's here to chat with me, Alli Goldberg. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
So as I mentioned in the intro, a large reason why I wanted to talk to you. Well, first of all, congratulations on being the first female guest of Beyond a Doud. So I appreciate that. So it's nice to have a how do they put it? That we've had a lot of sausages in this kind of can of beans, so it's nice to have it's nice to have someone from the fairer sex along. So thank you very much for that. But also,
I look forward to being judged on behalf of all women.
Absolutely. And we look forward to judging you.
Great.
So now the main reason that you're here is because you and I used to work together a long time ago.
Yeah, that feels like another life. Yeah.
Yeah, back in the Android Authority days, I was more Android Authority, you were more Digit. And you had a show which, if I remember correctly, was called the Best Tech Show Ever or the Best Weekly Tech Show Ever.
Yeah. The Best Weekly Tech Show Ever. Yeah. So I was in New York forever, and I was mostly doing sketch comedy. And then there was this crazy startup in San Francisco that wanted someone to make tech fun and approachable. And I feel strongly about that. And I think that that's still something that's like not totally solved. And it's,
absolutely not.
Especially as a woman, like the sites do still feel like pretty male.
Bro-centric, yes.
And it's like, it's interesting because like we're all using technology and then we don't really understand how or what goes into it or the things that it's, changing. Yeah, we realize it when it's too late, everything that it's changed about society. Yeah. Okay.
So that was going to be one of my questions is like, how did you end up working with it? Did you know somebody there or did they just reach out randomly or did they say, hey, you're kind of funny. We'd like you to do this thing or how did that work?
So when I was in New York, I created a bunch of comedy shows that mostly made fun of tech and internet culture. I would say more on the internet culture side. So in particular, one of the shows was called Blogalog. So it was like, it's fascinating actually how outdated it is now. But in 2010, I was so fascinated by the fact that people were now essentially putting their diaries online, which when you think about it, from the dawn of time until then, there was a joke about a diary is something you keep under lock and key and you don't want anyone to read it. And then suddenly everyone was just putting their personal shit on the internet. Am I allowed to curse on this show? Because I just
you are now.
Okay, great. So it was very fascinating to me. And as someone who's fascinated by stories and storytelling, it was interesting that stories used to really be controlled by politicians, reporters, official storytellers, and then stories started coming from everywhere. So a bit of a tangent, but so I was very fascinated by internet culture and how people were spilling their lives online. So I was doing these shows, but it reached, long story short, a tipping point where I kind of wanted to just get out of New York and try new things. And so I actually found that post I was randomly looking, I think at LinkedIn, or I don't think it was at LinkedIn. It was Idealist or Indeed jobs or something. And it was the description was looking for someone who can make tech fun and accessible.
Yeah.
And that's something that I wanted to help do. And so that job, I don't know how much we're allowed to get into it because it was a little bit of a shit show, but
it was a lot of
also very amusing because on the one hand, they told me do whatever you want, write funny scripts. And so I wrote scripts. I did something about how you had to, I made up fake products and you had to guess which one was real or fake and things like that. But then the startup didn't necessarily like have anyone to always edit or like get it up or whatever. So it was funny because I did feel like working there, I was sort of like plopped into an episode of Silicon Valley where I was like, oh, okay. Like that show is a documentary, I think, not a comedy. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, so a little, I don't know how much of the backstory you know, but Digit was actually a sister site to Android Authority.
Yes, which has been around for a long time and is very successful. Yeah.
And Digit has gone through, let's just say, a few different iterations of what they wanted Digit to be. At first, it was there were a lot of, I could tell you stories all, I could tell you all the stories because I was there at the beginning of it. And when one of the head folks at Android Authority, when I first started there, they were telling me, we just got this great domain name. It's going to be amazing. And I'm like, oh yeah, what is it? And he's like, Digit. And I'm just like, oh, that sounds really, easy to remember. Yep. DGIT. I'm like, that's a terrible idea.
Well, any tech company needs to leave out at least one vowel. That's how it goes. Yeah.
Right. But that's also a branding problem.
Right. And, no, it's a big problem. Yeah.
And at the time I was in the podcast called Techbeard, TEKBEARD. And like, damn, man, do you know how many listeners we lost from people looking for TECH? It's just like, Anyway, so that's why your podcast, Two Girls, One Podcast, is an amazing name. So, and it's hilarious and it's so appropriate. And, it's funny. I just started listening to it within the last few months. Like I knew it existed and I knew that you were, one half of the TG2G1P. I haven't quite gotten that done yet. 2G1P hosts, but it didn't even occur to me that there would be a tech angle to it until I started listening to it. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So that podcast, as you know, kind of runs the gamut. The idea is just looking at how the internet has allowed different trends to take off, groups of people to come together. So the podcast is fun because we talk to like a shit ton of fetishists, but also like data scientists. You know what I mean? So so it's been very interesting and enlightening in a lot of different ways. Yeah. I bet.
Yeah.
And so I want to kind of dive into the podcast a little bit because I love the format of it. And to me, it's one of the things that you have captured with that podcast is the evergreen nature of it. Like you could talk about shoes now, or you can talk about shoes in 3 months. It doesn't matter. It's still going to be relevant. So I love that. And I wish I could come up with an evergreen format, so I didn't have to do news, and I could do I could bang out 4 shows at once, put them out, and then be off for a month.
Yeah,
but anyway.
And tech is hard because if you're gonna go really deep into tech, obviously it is changing faster than we can. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm the idiot that chose news. So, but anyway, but no, so I definitely dig the evergreen aspect of it. So. Kudos to that. But when you're approaching a topic you just recently did, let's just stick with the shoes example. You just talked to, I forget the name of the website, one of the proprietors of a website that deals in the shoe trade, basically. How do you approach that? Because I'm assuming most of the time you're coming fairly blind, you haven't, so how do you approach that? I assume research is involved, but what's your process?
Yeah. So process wise, it starts with just reading a ton of newsletters and websites, really. What was interesting about the sneakerheads community is sneakerheads are something that are very much IRL that have existed forever, but our guest created StockX, which was basically tracking the resale value of these shoes as though they are commodities in the stock market.
Okay.
So that was interesting to us because once again, he really did a deep dive into the data behind all of this. So once again, it's sort of this weird nexus of the internet and real life coming together. I mean, it's funny because the podcast looks at internet trends, but arguably there is no difference anymore between real life and online. It's all one the same. So it's really just a lot of I will say an issue that we have with the podcast is that because the topics are so all over the place, I think listeners might discover us because we covered macrophilia, which is a fetish for giantesses, which is interesting because those kind of fetishes are actually very big online because they're very fantastical. So you can do a lot of art and so someone might find us because of something like that. And then next week we're looking at data, you know what I mean? So it is a little difficult in that sense, but it really runs the gamut. I honestly am just very interested also in human relationships and psychology to some extent. I kind of joke that if I weren't doing performance and writing, that I would probably go be a sex therapist. But I just think it's very fascinating the way, I'm rambling, but the thing I think I like best about that podcast is that the stories are so often very similar, where someone had this obsession, whether it is a fetish or it's with sneakers or whatever it is. Someone had some obsession and they thought that they were all alone. And then they went on Reddit or some forum or whatever, and they found out, oh, wow, there's thousands or even millions of people like me.
You are really not alone. Right.
So I like the idea that no one is alone. It's definitely difficult, though, because I also think that has fueled things like QAnon, which we did an episode on. And actually, I think that might be one of my favorite episodes because we talked to, I don't know if you've heard that one, but we spoke to someone who essentially lost her husband to QAnon. They're divorced now. I mean, he's alive, and then we spoke to someone who was a believer and found his way out. And so it was actually 3 parts. And then the third one was we actually talked, we talked to a cult deprogrammer. His name is Rick Ross, actually. No
great name.
But we spoke to a cult deprogrammer, and we also spoke with Mike Rothschild, who is a journalist who is specialized in QAnon. So it's interesting because these really lovely sides where people find each other, but QAnon is definitely an example of this very, very dark side where people find other people who believe in it as well, and therefore they think it is normal or okay. There's a lot of confirmation bias happening on the internet, essentially.
Really? Okay, I hadn't heard that. So
yeah, they don't say.
So, and one thing I really like about the podcast is there's elements of humor in it too. Obviously, because you're a comedian, now you have a new partner, Lindsay, who is also a comedian. We haven't gotten to know her as much as Jenna, but and what I think makes these topics so approachable is because you can do it through the guise of humor. So you can, and that's kind of like how I like to do it. Because I talk about tech news and tech reviews, and the thing is that is dry stuff. And you can sit in front of a microphone and say,
it's so dry, but it makes me mad because I don't think it has to be, but it is.
Right. And that's the thing. But one of the challenges that you have with a podcast, both even with tech news site or with you with the interviews that you do is, most stand-up comedians have weeks or months or years to prepare new material, whereas I kind of feel and I'm sure you probably get this too, you've got one shot, because this is the topic that we're talking about today. I'm never going to talk about this again with anybody. So it's if you're trying out, trying to be funny, which you and I both do, it's you've got one chance to make it land. And if it doesn't work, then it's just gone. So
yeah. I just try to think of it honestly as a different medium. So it's podcasting, it's conversational. I'm excited whenever the jokes naturally happen, but it's just, for me, the way I approach it is it's just a different art form than if you were doing sketch comedy or stand up where you have to have a certain number of laughs per second, really.
Right.
So,
and also with podcasting, you don't get that immediate feedback like a room full of laughter. Who
knows really how it's going?
You just set it out there and you're hoping that it's landing, but honestly, you've already kind of moved on. But okay, so And now you've had to, going from sketch comedy into like an interview format, you've had to kind of form yourself into being a journalist. So like, how did that process go? Was there any like night classes at university or something or are you just kind of winging it, or how does that work? I mean, be honest, I'm winging it.
No, it's a good
I'll
question.
Tell you.
Yeah. So a lot of what I've done in my career is kind of weird and doesn't really have a normal model or format, which I think has both hurt and helped me. But that's a personal story that we don't have to go into. But basically, like, for instance, so I think one thing I will say is if you are an avid listener of Two Girls, One Podcast and you listen from the beginning, like, I can't even bear to listen to some of the first ones because I'm like, oh, I see errors that I am making, right? So I hope that I have gotten better.
There's an evolution there, yeah.
Yeah. But I will say, so I didn't take any like classes on interviewing, which perhaps I should have, but I will say that something that we have always tried to focus on in this podcast in particular is that a lot of the communities we speak with have been ridiculed in some way. Many of them.
Okay.
Even if it's like pretty tech oriented, it's like, for instance, like Chris Dancy, who I think is so cool, who's like, he has a title as like the most, I don't know if, I forget what it is, but basically he is not exactly biohacking himself, but he has digitized essentially everything in his life. And he is like the most online man in the world. He tracks literally everything, right? So it's people that have been made fun of in some form, which I think is unnecessary. I think it's, from a comedy perspective, it's bad comedy. It's low-hanging fruit to make fun of someone who's like doing something that's odd. So I will say that our approach on the podcast has always been, let's let them speak. Our very first episode is furries, right? Which are like, we're notoriously ridiculed. Mm-hmm. And I think it's much more interesting. Or are, right? Yeah. And I think it's much more interesting to just speak with someone and be empathetic and hear what their story is and hear what their side is. And like anything that people think is weird is going to come out on its own, and I don't need to be an asshole and then make fun of it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
totally.
So it's different. So like it's comedy, but I don't think of it as comedy the way I approach, for instance, sketch comedy or the way I approach stand-up. Mm-hmm. But they're very related, you know, I think. But yeah, it's been interesting. It's also like podcasting is still, I mean, it's not new. And it's also in some ways just like the renaissance of radio, but.
Right.
Yeah.
Podcasting is in a weird place right now because it's like, and like often when I'm writing out pitches to, you know, various, you know, people, you know, interviews and whatnot, I'll usually put something to the effect of, I have a podcast, and then I'll put it in parentheses, who doesn't, and then, you know, and then continue on with the pitch because, you know, self-deprecating humor is one of the tools in my arsenal. Yeah. So, but getting back to the, you know, not picking on the low-hanging fruit. One of my mantras I've actually gotten from the Stuff You Should Know podcast, and the hosts there, Josh and Chuck, are usually very good at what they like to call not yucking somebody's yum. Mm-hmm. And you know, it's you know, when you have a community like that, like you know, furries or anybody, you know, you give them a chance to tell you why they're so passionate about it, because maybe there is something in there for you. Maybe not to the same level, but maybe even if it's just a nugget of understanding. I'm totally on board with that. So. Mm-hmm. But so awesome. Well done, Anya. So let's move on from the podcast a little bit. You're also a stand-up comedian, and you're in California. Is that right?
Yeah.
So how much of tech gets into your stand-up routines?
It depends. I've done quite a bit of stand-up in San Francisco, in which case I make fun of it a lot. Good. Something I will say that I love about San Francisco audiences is they are down. Like, I've made jokes in San Francisco where I'm like, how is this going to go? Like, I actually love San Francisco. San Francisco, I think, gets shit on a lot I love San Francisco. I love the people in San Francisco. Also, people say that tech has like ruined San Francisco and San Francisco is no longer weird. Like the weirdest things I've done, I did in San Francisco. But yeah, I did a stand-up set at the Battery in San Francisco where I made so much fun of the investors in the room. And, you know, I think I said something about, you know, I remember I made a connection to like them. This is a pre-pandemic, so I don't remember, but it was something about like them not hiring women and have fun jerking off alone at your laptop. Like, but like I definitely make a lot of jokes at tech about, yeah, there's so many, tech is so ripe for it. I remember I also had a joke about like some woman requested her data from Tinder and they gave her 800 pages and she was like so upset about her privacy. And I'm like, the real point here is 800 pages of data and they haven't found your fucking match. You know what I mean? So like,
I know, seriously.
I think there's a lot to make fun of. So, but when I'm in LA or New York, it's a little different. I mean, there's also so much that everyone is using that you can make fun of, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure.
And dating apps for sure. Like dating apps are ridiculous. I could talk about them all day. They're just like a fascinating human experiment. I think they're designed to fail. I think they could be designed to actually work and they don't. So,
you know, it's funny. I actually met my wife on the internet, but not in a dating app. I actually met her through email.
Okay, go on.
Oh, okay. All right. So we want the story.
I do.
I want to try to figure out how much I can Reader's Digest this, but do you remember chain letters back in the day?
Oh yeah.
Okay, send this to
back
10
in the day,
people.
my dad still sends them to me.
Oh Lord. Okay, I think they get filtered into spam for me, but yeah. So send this to 10 people, and you know you'll get $10,000 by the end of the week, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So back in the day, I hated chain letters because, you know, I was a purist. I knew what I was doing. Chain letters are for noobs, right? Mm-hmm. And this was back in the day before noobs was even a word. So I got a chain letter once and I deleted it. And about 3 weeks later, I got the same chain letter, but this time it came from someone I had no idea who they were. Uh-huh. And I'm like, okay, because, you know, the idea is you send a chain letter to 10 of your contacts. So, like, who is this person? Why am I in their contacts? Okay. Mm-hmm. And what I figured out was the chain letter was sent to the exact same people that it had been sent to 3 weeks ago. Like, my brother was on the list and, like, a couple of other people. And so what I figured out was the person who had sent me the chain letter went back through the headers and, like, grabbed email addresses from the headers and then sent it to those same people. And I'm just like, first of all, I respect that because, like, you know, there's a certain set of balls that's required to do something like that. But at the same time, I went off and I'm like, oh my God, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Why would you ever do this? And blah, 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 blah. 2 paragraphs worth of like insults to my future wife. And so we got into a bit of an email war back and forth for several months.
Okay, so you're saying I should be a troll, and that's how I'll meet my husband.
Yeah. I mean, if
I'm into it.
Yeah, okay.
You know, it's a tactic that I haven't tried before, and I'm willing to try anything at this point. So
yeah, I mean, I'm
gonna start just harassing people on Twitter and seeing what happens.
You could. I mean, you have been trying to beef up your Twitter presence, so that could be a way to do it. That could be a way to do it.
2 birds, 1 stone. Okay. So you're sending her antagonistic emails because nothing says romance like angry emails. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Like, my boyfriend is going to beat you up, you know, stuff like that. Obviously, that was one of her replies. Maybe not obviously. There's nothing wrong with that. But anyway. Okay. So long story short, a couple of months later, my a cousin of mine actually passed away. And I put a quote from his funeral in my signature because it was, what was it? Something like, it's okay to do anything you want as long as you look good doing it. Or something like that. That was something that my cousin was fond of saying, and you know, so I put like, you know, R.I.P. blah blah blah, and so for some reason she said, "Oh, hey, looks like, you know, someone you know died. So I'm sorry to hear about that." I'm like, "Oh, thank you," and then we started emailing each other, not hate, for a few months, and long story short, we met, we fell in love, and the rest is history.
That's lovely. And
insane, but I'll take the lovely compliment.
Well, but you know what? I think that is a really great example of how, in many ways, the real online mimics the real world, right? So in the olden days, perhaps you would have like, you're in a you're in a village, you're in a college campus, whatever, and you keep running into this person, and then there's these little shifts that happen, and essentially it's how it played out. But it's also interesting to think like, well, if you hadn't put that at the bottom of your email, would the conversation have shifted or not?
Right. And I think we were both getting sick of being assholes to each other. So,
but why did you continue to respond and be assholes? I feel like you both knew something was there even when you were being assholes. You know what I mean? Because like if a stranger was being an asshole to me, I'd probably block or delete.
Right. And well, see, that's the thing is back then that wasn't a thing. Yeah. I don't even think they had filter lists back then. This is 1996.
Oh shit. Okay.
There's a 1 at the start of this year. Okay. Just so we're clear. How old this is. Like we both were using email accounts that were issued to us by our schools.
Right.
So actually, no, that's even weird. That's not a weird thing anymore. At the time, that was weird. But anyway, so it was like so super old school and at the time people kept saying, man, you got to go on Oprah or something, like, because it was just such a weird thing to do. And then years later, people started like actively trying to meet each other online. We're like, we got that down.
And it's so interesting actually, that shift as well. Like I remember I had an older cousin who started online dating in the 90s, and it was like considered very strange. And then boom, it switched and was like completely normal. And now when you meet someone who's met not through the internet, it's like, oh my God.
That's the weird part, right?
You met at a party? Like what? So
and that was actually like, from what I remember, that was a fairly quick switch too. Like it was like nobody dating, everybody's online.
Everyone. Yeah. Whew. I agree. It felt like it happened overnight. Yeah.
And thank God I never had to deal with that.
You were so lucky you never had to deal with it. It is a zoo out there.
I have no doubts. And you know what? I'm okay. Like I feel bad for my son and daughter because, my son's 14. So he's probably like a couple years away from a dating app. But like, he's still got high school to work with, but like after that, who knows? If he doesn't go to college, he's going to have to be on a dating app. And I feel bad for him. I legitimately feel bad for him.
I know. It's weird because like I just wasn't even necessarily thinking about it in my early 20s. But as an old lady, I'm like, meet your husband in college, because after that, it's a fucking shit show.
I know, right? Then you have to go do people even go to bars anymore? I don't even know. I don't even know how this works.
I mean, I'm a bad one to ask because in case you couldn't tell from the podcast, like I love weird experiences. So, and now we're still kind of in pandemic mode. Like, but I don't really drink because I have severe insomnia and it is the worst. But yeah, bars are not interesting to me. Like I'm so much more interested in going to like a strange show or art opening or event. But yeah, I think people go to bars. I think they do that.
Okay. All right.
I've heard from people that are cooler than me. Yeah.
Speaking of the pandemic, how has that affected your performance career? Are you recovering at this point?
Yeah. So I actually can't complain because I have been okay. And it's definitely not ideal. I very much I was always on stage. And the idea that I wasn't going to be on stage for a year, it was almost like, I kind of joke that I like bottled it up. Is that healthy? I just bottled it up.
Oh, absolutely.
What could go wrong? But I can't even really think about the idea of like, I don't know. I got vaccinated and I got back on stage. I do have some news. The contract isn't signed, so I can't say anything yet. But I do have some news that happened during the pandemic that I'm very excited about. And so I can't complain. You know what I mean? Like I'm fine.
Nice.
I'm fine if the contract should get signed like in the next week or so. So I'm okay. But
as long as that happens, I'm good.
Yeah. But definitely I miss getting back on stage. And I do want to say it's been so hard for performers. If you have performers in your life, like support them however you can, Patreon, buy them dinner, whatever, because I'm glad that I left New York when I did. And part of why I worked for that crazy digit where we met is that part of it was me looking ahead at life in theater and sketch comedy, which is what I was doing. And it's like, wow, you could be at the pinnacle and you're not making much money. And then fast forward a few years, I mean, granted, it's so unprecedented, but I have many friends who were considered like pretty successful. Like they were gigging, they were paying their bills through theater.
Mhm.
All of theater shut down. And they're like, you know, so now they're in their 30s and they're moving back in with their parents and they left New York. Or I have a friend who's so talented and he's like doing gardening, you know what I mean? Because there's no work and things are just starting to come back, but the industry's really hurt. So even the things that are coming back, a lot of theaters have closed, but even if they haven't, they're doing fewer or smaller productions. So it's really a mess. But it also begs this like larger existential question that I have, which is like stage versus internet, digital, podcasting, TV.
Yeah.
You know, I love performing live more than anything, but like it's not a great stable income.
Of course.
Yeah. So
Well,
pandemic's been rough, but I can't personally complain because I've been okay. And I've been doing Zoom shows. They're not my jam, but they're nice to be rehearsing, developing new material. Yeah.
Well, and it's a good way to, you know, develop new material. And, you know, I'm talking to you about being a comedian as if I have ever done this ever in my life. And I never have. So like, you know, I'm talking about like working on your sets and, you know, doing writing. I don't know. I have no idea.
And I've gotten a lot of writing done in the pandemic as well, but definitely like it hurts to not be on stage all the time. But it's, but I've also noticed that the pandemic created some of my own fears where I'm actually, last week, I was like, you know what? I need to push myself. I need to go see shows. I need to get back out there. Because I also moved to LA right before the pandemic. So I'm in this weird position where I'm not new to LA, but I feel brand new and I don't know anyone. So I'm like, I need to get back out there and do all the things that I meant to do when I moved here.
I have a friend of mine who moved to New York like a month before the pandemic started. So
fucking sucks.
Yes, it does.
Because honestly, the other reason why I can't complain is because my family, everyone I know is still in New York, and being in New York for the pandemic sounds literally miserable. And I have been in LA where it's fabulous outside and
they have beaches.
I live by the beach, and as a former East Coaster, like it blows my mind every day. So it's like, yes, it's a global pandemic, but like I walk to the beach, I look at the flowers.
But you know what? If the big one ever hits, you're the first one into the ocean.
Oh, the earthquake. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I actually have some pretty active fears around global warming, and I think we're all fucked. So
okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, sure. So,
yeah.
Totally get that. So you know what? It's funny. As long as I've known my wife, she has actively resisted going to California because she's always been convinced that the second she steps foot into California, the big one's going to hit and we're all going to fall into the ocean. So, and this summer, we were actually supposed to go to LA for 2 weeks for a vacation. And I actually talked her into it, and we ended up having to cancel it anyway. But still, I spent this entire summer planning and then canceling vacations. So yeah. But COVID will do that to you.
Right. Oh yeah. We have a lot of anti-vaxxers here too in LA. It's not great.
Oh, that's not awesome.
It's not awesome. It's not awesome.
Delta's already been through our house, so.
Oh, interesting.
Oh yeah, I am a breakthrough statistic.
Really? See,
yes.
I think there's way more breakthrough cases than are being reported.
Well, yeah, and
how would you report it, right? Like you can go get a COVID test at CVS and do it yourself at home. Like how would that get reported? But I do think that.
Oh, the CDC knows.
Yeah.
If you do a drive-through test, they know, because we had the Chicago equivalent of the CDC was calling us for like follow-ups and telling us like, you know, stay home and yada yada yada. But like, you know, so I fall into the obese category of high-risk COVID, and my wife is diabetic. So like, if the two of us had not been vaccinated, I don't even want to think about what it would have done to us.
Right, and that's the really important part. Yeah, because I know anti-vaxxers that are like, well, there's so many breakthrough cases. Why would I get the vaccine now? And it's like, well, you still will have it not as bad, you know. So, glad to hear that you were vaccinated before getting it. And
my friend Ryan is on, and we used to podcast together. But he's currently living in Florida, so he's like in the the worst case scenario of the United States when it comes to COVID. Yeah. So sorry, Ryan, pour one out for you, brother.
I can't decide what's worse right now, Florida or Texas. I think it's Texas, but like
It
Florida
might be.
really held that spot for a long time, and Texas is just really getting up there.
Yeah.
Being a horrible place. I'm seeing a hashtag Texodus now, which I'm kind of into.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah.
I have not seen that before.
Oh, you'll see it.
That might be good material for the next stand-up show. So, you know,
sad. Yeah.
I wanted to talk about blogalogs a little bit. Do you ever see that making a resurgence in the stand-up circuit out in LA? There, you think? Do you have some blogalogs in you anymore?
So what we used to do is we would perform like Craigslist posts, Reddit threads, and we would take them really out of the box. So maybe they'd become a musical number or something like that. And I think it was a really interesting time when we started doing it because it was so new. I remember at our first show, we had this like weird faux intermission where we played like Charlie Bit My Finger and like the double rainbow guy. And when you think
amazing.
about it, yeah. And I remember the audio went out. And so as a performer, you're like backstage, like, oh my God, the audio's out, like disaster. And the audience filled in every single sound effect and word. And
Awesome.
It was really wild. It was almost like this weird religious thing where you had this crowd of people just like chanting things at a screen. But it was really fascinating though, because like the internet was a very different place, right? Where everyone saw the same viral videos back then and had this like shared experience. And now I feel like it's almost too big and too fragmented. But we also, through doing that show, saw some of the major shifts when things, for instance, moved from text to being more image-based, which was then not a problem for us, but, you know, we were performing words, you know what I mean? And so, but it was interesting to like see that shift from text to images to video being what's more popular. But I don't think that show is necessarily relevant now. And so, and I loved that show.
I would have thought that anti-vaxxers and, you know, the last 4 years of the presidency would have been like low-hanging fruit for something like blogalogs.
We also saw the internet kind of get darker, right? Like in the early in 2010s, that era, it was very exciting. Like we're, you know, Facebook connecting the world, and then we saw it get dark. So our last shows were in 2016. And we were performing stuff from Breitbart, and it was like darkly comedic, which was really fun, but really fucked up. So, I mean, you're right. I mean, maybe it could be revived in a new form, but I also kind of want as a performer to know when perhaps things have done their time.
Better to trade away a player too soon than too late.
Right. So I think there are new projects to be made. I think the thing that I dislike the most about the pandemic is how it's hard for me as a performer to be inspired, because usually I am creating something, selling it into some other form, and then I already have an idea for the next thing I want to create. And that's been something that's very hard in the pandemic. Like usually I'm already on my way to creating my next event or show or something like that. But no, not right now. But I'm hoping to be inspired somewhere soon.
And I think I don't know that we've actually explicitly said this, but blogalogs was basically you were performing verbatim, word for word, things that you found on the internet. So I have long been thinking about, and I just can't quite get myself to pull the trigger on it, but doing dramatic readings of the thing where you rate things, restaurants and stuff.
Yelp.
What is that called? Yelp.
Yeah.
I've long wanted to do like just a brief segment of like dramatic readings of Yelp reviews.
It's very funny. There are other groups that have done it since then. I'll send it to you later because I'm blanking on the name. But there was at one point a group that went viral for just reading Yelp reviews super dramatically. But I mean, I still think there's a lot of comedy to be mined. I at this point in my life / career, I'm very interested in some sort of comedic project that like teaches people how to communicate again, because I think it's like gone so off the rails. But I'm not sure what that is yet. Any
interest in pursuing further YouTube projects, or do you have? I shouldn't admit this, but I haven't done my research. Do you even have a YouTube channel at this point?
No, it's a great question. So it's something that many people have scolded me for about a decade, that I
Okay.
need more digital content. And it's like pretty ironic because I love looking at the internet and internet culture. But I think because I love looking at that,
You
there's
don't
a
want to
part
make
of me
it.
that like doesn't want to go there and loves live stuff. But it's
Yeah.
definitely something that I need to work on, just because that's the world we live in. To be a performer
Right.
that doesn't have a large online presence is actually very problematic. So
And
yeah.
if I remember correctly from one of your latest shows, I don't know if it was the latest or not, but your partner Lindsay was going around giving awards to people that
Oh
she
my
had
gosh, I
had
love that she
made.
did that. Yeah.
And so like just to give a little bit of context, I don't want to give away the farm. Go listen to the Two Girls One podcast so you can hear it for yourself. But
Yeah.
they got some trophies, and they made like best fourth person in line, and they would like go up to the fourth person in the line and hand them the trophy and like celebrate them and clap them.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the follow-up questions was, "Oh, did you film it?" And she's like, well, we probably should have, but at the same time, we just wanted to kind of enjoy the moment. So, and I mean, I think there's a my kids watch so much YouTube, and like, there are all these families that are out there that do all these, this goofy stuff. They do 24-hour challenges in a pool, or a yes day for 24 hours, which, by the way, I will never give my children a yes day. I need to make that explicitly clear, and as much as possible, because maybe it's a failing for me as a parent, but I can only imagine the effed up stuff that they would ask for. But anyway, so like, but these families, they do this, and it's like, on the one hand, it looks like they're just doing it for fun, and it's all fun and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, at a certain point, they're planning this stuff. Like, they're planning out, maybe they're calling it a yes day, but I promise you, they have scheduled out every hour of that 24. Like, now I'm going to fall into the pool, and it's going to be hilarious. And then, like, after that, I'm going to get out, and I'm going to find out I don't have any extra underwear. So, I mean, like, it's, they've planned this stuff out, and it's actually kind of, you have to assume, if you're, a negative person like me, that this is all planned out, that this is all staged. Like,
well, it's not even negativity. It's just like, when you think about, if you've ever participated, just for the audience, in a film project, there is so much that goes into it, and much also in the post-production side with editing and everything, that it's tough to imagine that these are very organic.
Oh yeah. I mean, like, realistically, and I plan this podcast, as much as possible. Like, I don't know what my guests are going to say, but I have a good idea as to what we're going to talk about. And most of the rest of the show is scripted, so like, I'm a control freak when it comes to stuff like that. I could never just like organically let stuff happen, just because, like, I want to have an idea that it's going to be somewhat entertaining. So and that's why I brought on Alli. I just blanked out on your last Goldberg, right? Go. God, I'm so sorry. That's going to get dropped in post. But anyway, that's why I brought on Alli Goldberg, because I knew she would be immensely entertaining for everybody. So, but anyway, so yeah, I think I've probably kept you about as long as I said I would. So we can go ahead and start wrapping things up. First of all, I want to go ahead and just roll out the red carpet for you. Let everybody know where they can find you on the socials. If you have any, projects coming up that you want to pimp, by all means, the floor is yours. So tell us everything we need to know about Alli.
So, as we just discussed, I hate social media, but I'm trying to get better at it. So I'm at Alli_Goldie, ALLI_GOLDI, across platforms. You can also visit AllisonGoldberg.com, which is where I will list upcoming shows. And I do have a project that I want to announce, but the contract isn't signed, and I feel like I shouldn't. Right. But stay tuned for that.
I feel like we should have done this a week from now, just so we could have had the breaking news. But
yeah. But I'll tell you when we're done recording, though.
Okay. Yeah. I'll be watching the Discord too, and I can definitely mention it on upcoming shows. And actually, this probably isn't going to air until like the 15th. So no, it's okay. We don't have to. But anyway, okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for making tech funny. Thank you for making it accessible, and thank you for inspiring this show in a fairly roundabout way. But I mean, like you are definitely one of the catalysts that brought Benefit of the Doud to the airwaves. So thank you much for that.
For having a great and punny name.
Oh, I appreciate. I mean, come for the pun, stay for the comedy. That's what I say. So, all right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Beyond the Doud. And I want to thank you once again, Alli, for coming on and being awesome with us. And I want to thank everybody else for watching and for giving us the benefit of the Doud.